My name is Nora Calloway. I'm 34 and I audit nonprofit accounts for a living, which means my whole job is noticing when the numbers on a page don't match the story somebody's telling about them. I grew up in Ashford County, Tennessee, in a house on Milner Road with a porch that sagged on one end, and a grandmother who ran the whole family, without ever raising her voice. Eleanor Calloway kept a boxwood folding ruler in the pocket of her housecoat. Measure twice, she used to say, setting it flat against whatever she was building. A birdhouse, a decision. She was the one who taught me to write things down. Not because she didn't trust people. Because she'd lived long enough to know that memory bends and paper doesn't. My mother, Corinne, loved my grandmother the way you love the sun, from a comfortable distance, benefiting from the warmth without doing much to earn it. My older sister, Shelby, was the one who got to be the favorite. Not because she was cruel. Because she was easy. She laughed loud and cried easy and never made anyone feel like they had to explain themselves. I was the one who read the fine print. When our grandmother's hip started failing in 2019, I was the one who drove out to Milner Road every Sunday to go through her mail. Because bills don't stop coming just because a woman starts forgetting where she put her keys. Shelby visited too. She brought flowers and stayed 20 minutes and made our grandmother laugh so hard she had to catch her breath. I want to be fair about this part, because fairness matters to me more than most things. Shelby wasn't a villain back then. The Christmas before Grandma got sick, Shelby drove 4 hours through an ice storm to bring me soup when I had the flu and Marcus was out of town. She sat on the edge of my bed and made me laugh until my ribs hurt. That's the sister I knew for 30 years. That's the sister I still, some nights, miss. Grandma Eleanor died in March of 2020. In the same bed she'd raised 3 children in, with her folding ruler on the nightstand where she kept it every night of her life. She left it to me. Not the house. Not money. A wooden ruler with her initials carved into the hinge, wrapped in a note that said, "You always measured twice. Keep doing that, even when nobody asks you to." I put it in the top drawer of my desk at the firm. I didn't know yet how much I'd need it. What I didn't know that spring, what none of us knew, was that our grandmother had also left something else. Something folded into a manila envelope and taped to the underside of a dresser drawer in a room nobody had cleaned out yet. I wouldn't find it for 6 more years. The 5 years after Grandma died were quiet ones. I married Marcus. We bought a 2-bedroom brick ranch on Willowmere Court in Franklin, the kind of house with a mudroom and a mortgage you can actually see the end of. I made partner track at the firm. Shelby married a contractor named Dale Pruitt and had 2 kids in 3 years and posted about all of it, cheerfully, the way she'd always done everything. We weren't close exactly. We were cordial. Sunday dinners at Mom's twice a month, birthday cards, the occasional phone call that ran 12 minutes and covered nothing real. The first time something felt off, I didn't think much of it. It was a Tuesday in September, and I'd stopped by my mother's place on Cedarbrook Lane to drop off a casserole dish. Shelby's minivan was in the driveway, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the folder on the kitchen table. A slim manila folder with estate written across the tab in Shelby's loopy handwriting, and my mother's reading glasses sitting on top of it like she'd just set them down. "What's that?" I asked. My mother slid it into a drawer so fast the glasses clattered. "Just some paperwork Dale's been helping us sort through. Insurance stuff." I let it go. You let a lot of things go with family. I didn't push. Dale had always been decent to me, quick with a joke, good with the kids, the kind of guy who'd show up unasked to help you move a couch. He'd fixed my porch railing the summer before without being asked twice. I had no reason to distrust him. That's the thing about people who do you wrong later. They usually did you right first. I told myself I was being paranoid, that 30 years of being the responsible one had made me suspicious of ordinary family logistics. I told myself Shelby loved our mother as much as I did, just differently. Louder. Closer. I want to be honest about something. Some part of me was relieved that Shelby was handling things. It meant I didn't have to drive out to Cedarbrook Lane every week the way I'd driven out to Milner Road for 4 years straight. It meant somebody else was doing the measuring for once. I let myself rest. That was the mistake. Not trusting Shelby. You're allowed to trust your sister. The mistake was putting the ruler back in the drawer, and I was a sister who got her sister back for a while, and I wasn't about to question that gift. It started with Christmas. Shelby called me in December, not a text, an actual call, and asked if I'd come early to help decorate Mom's tree the way we used to as kids, the two of us fighting over who got to put the star on top. I said yes before I even checked my calendar. We spent that whole afternoon in Mom's living room on Cedarbrook Lane, drinking cider, laughing about Dale's terrible attempts at gingerbread houses, letting my niece Hazel string popcorn badly onto thread. Shelby looked at me at one point, tinsel in her hair, and said, "I miss when it was just us against the world, Nor." And I felt something in my chest loosen that had been tight for years. Through the winter, she started calling more. Not about the estate, not about paperwork, just to talk. She asked about my job. She remembered a deposition I'd mentioned weeks earlier and asked how it turned out. She sent me a photo of Hazel's school project, a diorama of Ashford County, with a note that said Grandma would have loved this. In February, she showed up at my office with coffee unannounced just because she was in the area. We sat in my car in the parking garage for 40 minutes and talked about nothing. Dale's business, Marcus's job, whether Mom should get a smaller dog now that the golden retriever had passed. It felt, for the first time in years, like having a sister again instead of having a relative. I let my guard down completely that winter. I stopped noticing the folders. I stopped wondering about the mail from the title company. When Mom mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd signed something to make Shelby a co-signer on the checking account, just for convenience, in case something happens to me, I nodded along and didn't ask a single follow-up question. Why would I? My sister had come back to me. The distance I'd assumed was permanent had closed. And I was so grateful for the warmth of it that I didn't look too closely at what was happening underneath. That's the part of this story that still catches in my throat more than any of what came after. Not the betrayal. The loyalty loop before it. Believing, for one whole winter, that I'd gotten my sister back, right as she was quietly finishing what she'd started in September. I want to tell you about the day the loosening in my chest tightened right back up. It was March, almost a year to the day since I'd found that folder on the kitchen table, when my mother called and asked me to come help her go through Grandma Eleanor's old dresser. The one that had sat in the guest room on Cedarbrook Lane, untouched, since we moved it out of Milner Road 5 years earlier. Shelby's been meaning to get to it, Mom said, but with the kids and everything, it never happens. I thought you could look through it. You're good with that kind of thing. I drove out that Saturday. Marcus offered to come, but I told him I'd rather do it alone. There's a particular kind of grief in going through a dead woman's dresser drawers, and I didn't want an audience for it. The dresser was oak, scratched at the corners, with a smell that hadn't changed in 5 years. Cedar and something floral I never identified. I went through the top drawers first. Handkerchiefs. A church bulletin from 1994. A photograph of my grandmother at 19, standing in front of a Chevrolet with her hair pinned back, smiling at whoever was holding the camera. In the bottom drawer, underneath a stack of quilting squares she'd never gotten around to sewing, my hand caught on something taped to the underside of the drawer above it. An envelope, cream-colored, gone soft and brittle at the folds. I almost didn't see it. It was pressed flat against the wood, deliberately hidden rather than forgotten. I peeled the tape back carefully, the kind of careful you learn from handling fragile things for a living, papers that can't be replaced. The envelope wasn't sealed. Inside was a single folded sheet in my grandmother's handwriting, and behind it, a photocopy of a deed. I didn't read the letter first. I read the deed because that's the part of me that's an accountant before it's anything else. I go to the numbers, I go to the language, I go to what's provable. It was the deed to the house on Milner Road. My grandmother's house. The one that had sold 5 years ago. Right after she died, with the proceeds split 3 ways between my mother, Shelby, and me, the way we'd all understood the will to say. Except this deed had a name on it I didn't expect. A trust. The Eleanor Calloway Family Trust, established in 2018, 2 years before she died. I sat down on the edge of the bed, right there in the guest room, on a quilt my grandmother had made, holding a piece of paper that meant the house had never simply been split 3 ways at all. It had gone somewhere else first. Somewhere none of us had ever been told about. I photographed both pages with my phone before I did anything else. Front and back. Then I photographed the envelope, the tape marks, the drawer itself, because I've spent 12 years auditing organizations that lose things they shouldn't lose. And the first rule is always the same. Document before you disturb. I did not call my mother down the hall. I did not call Shelby. I sat very still, and I read my grandmother's letter, and what it said would take me 3 more months to fully understand. Nora, if you're reading this, it means you finally went through that dresser, which means it probably took longer than I'd have liked. That's all right. I know you. You get to things when you get to them, and you get to them right. I set up a trust 2 years before I died. Cedar Ridge Bank helped me do it quiet, because I didn't want a family meeting about it, and I didn't want anybody's opinion on how I handle what's mine. The house on Milner Road went into that trust, and the trust names a trustee to manage the proceeds after I'm gone. Not split them outright, manage them, until certain conditions are met. I did that because I watched your mother spend money like it was a feeling instead of a number, and I watched Shelby borrow from people her whole life without much intention of paying it back on time. I love them both. Love doesn't mean handing somebody a lit match. I named you Trustee Nora. Not because you're my favorite, I never had one, whatever anybody tells you, but because he'll walk you through what the trust actually says, and what it means for the money that's supposed to be sitting in it right now. I have a feeling, and I want to be honest that it's only a feeling, that somebody in this family is going to try to get around this before you ever find it. I'm not naming names. I'm just telling you, measure twice, sweetheart. Especially now. I'm not betting on the loud one. I'm betting on the one who showed up. I love you. All of you. That's why I did this the hard way instead of the easy way. Grandma, I read it twice. Then I sat on that quilt for a long time with my grandmother's ruler-straight handwriting in my lap. And I thought about the folder on the kitchen table 18 months earlier, and the unopened mail from the title company, and the checking account Shelby had quietly been added to for convenience. I thought about a whole winter of coffee in a parking garage and tinsel in my sister's hair, and I felt something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with grief, and everything to do with recognition. I did not confront anyone that day. I folded the letter back along its original creases, the way you handle evidence you intend to use later, and I put it and the photocopied deed into my bag. I told my mother I hadn't found anything but old quilting squares. I don't like that I lied. I've made peace with the fact that I had to. On the drive home, I called Foster Whitlock's office and left a message asking for the first available appointment. Foster Whitlock's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building off the Ashford Town Square, above a hardware store that had been there since before I was born. He had a quiet way of listening that didn't perform sympathy. He just listened, and took notes on a yellow legal pad, and let me finish every sentence before he said anything. I laid it all out. The trust letter, the deed, the dates. He pulled the original file, which took his assistant almost 20 minutes, and when he came back, he set his glasses on and read through it slowly while I sat there trying not to fill the silence. Your grandmother set this up correctly, he said finally. Irrevocable trust, you named as sole trustee, proceeds from the Milner Road sale meant to go into a managed account. Education fund for the grandchildren, medical expenses for your mother, that kind of thing, with you controlling disbursement. He looked up. Did you know the house sold 5 years ago? I knew it sold. I was told the money was split 3 ways. He was quiet for a second. That's not what this document says should have happened. And there should be a court. He told me the bank could pull the disbursement records if I formally stepped into my role as trustee, which meant notifying the family that the trust existed, and that I intended to administer it the way our grandmother had written it. That's going to be an uncomfortable conversation, he said. I know. You don't have to do it today. I thought about the folder on the kitchen table. I thought about my mother's reading glasses clattering into a drawer. I thought about Shelby's face, tinsel lit, saying I miss when it was just us against the world. I'd like the paperwork today, I said. The conversation can wait a little longer. I want to know exactly what I'm walking into before I walk into it. He nodded like that was the answer he'd have given, and pulled a folder of his own across the desk, one with real information in it, this time, instead of secrets. I drove home with my grandmother's ruler in the cup holder, where I'd started keeping it without quite deciding to measure twice. I had one more measurement to take before I said a word to anyone. Foster Whitlock's assistant called 2 weeks later. The bank had located the account. A trust account opened in 2020, funded with the full proceeds of the Milner Road sale, $287,000, exactly what the house had sold for after closing costs. The current balance was $4,110. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot with the printout in my lap for a long time, before I could make myself read it line by line. The withdrawals started 8 months after Grandma died. Small ones first, $2,000 here, $3,500 there, memo lines that said things like family expense and home repair. Then in 2022, a withdrawal of $61,000, memo line blank, transferred to an account at a different bank entirely. I recognized the routing number. It took me 40 minutes with my laptop and a stack of old mail I'd kept out of habit, but I recognized it. It matched a check Shelby had once written me for a birthday gift, 3 years back. The account was hers and Dale's. The rest came out in pieces over the following 2 years. A payment to a contractor's supply company that matched, almost to the month, when Dale had opened his own construction business instead of subcontracting for somebody else. A payment to a private school registration office. The same fall Hazel started at Brentwood Christian Academy instead of the public elementary school 2 streets over. Payment after payment, each one small enough to look ordinary next to the last one. And together adding up to nearly the whole of what should have funded a trust for 2 children's education and their grandmother's care. I want to tell you I felt rage. What I actually felt was quieter and worse than rage. I felt the floor of something I'd trusted my whole life go soft under my feet. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page of the statement before I did anything else. Front and back, corner to corner, the way you preserve evidence you know you're going to need later and can't afford to lose. Then I called Foster Whitlock's office and asked for a formal accounting of every disbursement since 2020, along with a certified copy for my own files. That night, I sat at my kitchen table on Willowmere Court with Marcus across from me. The statement laid out between us like something that might still bite. "Nora," he said quietly, watching my face. "You don't look surprised." "I'm not," I said. "That's the part that scares me." He reached over and put his hand flat over mine. The way you'd steady something that was shaking, even though my hands weren't. "What do you want to do?" I looked at the folding ruler sitting on the table between the statements. My grandmother's initials worn smooth into the hinge from 60 years of handling. "I want to be sure," I said. "Before I say one word to my sister, I want to be completely, unshakably sure. I need to take a breath here, because what happened over the next month was a different kind of thing entirely. Not the sharp shock of the dresser drawer, but a slow, deliberate season of building something I could stand on. I didn't confront anyone yet. I've never been the kind of person who moves before she's ready, and this was too large a thing to move on half-finished. I spent 3 Saturdays at Foster Whitlock's office, going through 5 years of statements line by line, matching withdrawals to dates, cross-referencing them against things I already knew: Dale's business opening, Hazel's school enrollment, a kitchen renovation Shelby had posted about 18 months earlier with a caption that said, "Finally treating myself." Finally. As if the money had always been hers to spend. I hired an outside forensic accountant, a woman named Renata Ford who came recommended by a colleague at my firm, someone with no connection to Ashford County, and no stake in how this story ended. She spent 2 weeks going through everything I'd gathered and produced a report that laid the whole picture out in numbers too clean to argue with. $282,890 disbursed from a trust meant for 2 grandchildren's education and a mother's long-term care. Roughly $4,000 remaining. There was a night in the middle of all that where I sat alone in my parked car outside the bank after hours, engine off, radio off, just sitting there in the dark because I didn't have the strength yet to drive home and be a normal person at dinner. I don't remember how long I sat there. I remember the streetlights coming on one at a time down the row, and thinking that was how I'd know I was still moving. One light, then the next. I thought about calling Shelby right then in the dark, and asking her to explain herself before I had every fact lined up. The old part of me. The part that spent 30 years wanting nothing more than for my sister to look at me and mean it when she said "I miss you." Wanted badly to give her the chance to explain it away, the way I'd let her explain away so many small things before. I didn't call. I drove home instead. I made dinner. I let Marcus tell me about his day, And I listened, actually listened, because I needed 1 hour where my whole life wasn't a spreadsheet of betrayal. That's a thing nobody tells you about finding out something like this. The evidence doesn't arrive all at once and knock you flat. It arrives in installments, and in between the installments, you still have to live a life. You still have to remember your neighbor's dog's name, and pick up dry cleaning, and exist as a person who isn't only this. By the end of that month, I had what I needed. A certified accounting from the bank. A forensic report from an independent accountant with no reason to lie for me. Photographs of every document, dated and time-stamped. A copy of my grandmother's letter, notarized as authentic by Foster Whitlock's office. I sat at my kitchen table with all of it spread in front of me like a hand of cards I'd finally finished counting. And for the first time since that afternoon in the guest room, I felt something steady under my feet instead of soft. I picked up my phone and called my mother. Not to accuse her. To tell her I needed to see her and Shelby together, this Sunday, at the house on Cedarbrook Lane. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "I found something of Grandma's," I said. "It's time we all talked about it. I want to tell you about the drive over, because I remember every mile of it. I brought 3 folders, not one, a habit from 12 years of audits, where you never walk into a room with a single copy of anything that matters. One for my mother, one for Shelby, one for myself, in case anyone tried to make the conversation go somewhere it hadn't gone. I brought my grandmother's ruler too, though I couldn't have told you exactly why. It just felt wrong to walk into that house without it. Shelby's minivan was already in the driveway when I pulled up. Through the front window I could see her at the kitchen table, Dale beside her, both of them looking like people who'd been told a serious conversation was coming and had spent the week guessing what it was about. My mother let me in. She hugged me too tightly, the way she'd started doing since Grandma died, like affection was something she could make up for in volume what it lacked in consistency over the years. I sat down across from Shelby. Dale nodded at me, easy as always, no idea yet what was in the folder under my arm. "So," Shelby said, trying for lightness and missing it by a mile. "What's this big mystery?" I didn't raise my voice. "I want you to understand that clearly, because everything that came after depended on it." I opened the folder and set my grandmother's letter on the table first, the original, still creased from 6 years folded in a dresser drawer. "I found this in Grandma's dresser," I said. "Underneath the drawer where the quilting squares were." I watched my mother's face as she read it. Watched the color leave it in stages, the way it does when someone is reading something and simultaneously calculating how much of it they already knew. Shelby read it after her, and her face did something different. Not surprise. A kind of bracing, like someone watching a wave they'd known for a long time was eventually going to reach them. "Grandma set up a trust," I said, once the letter had made its way around the table. "The house on Milner Road went into it. I'm the trustee. I only found out a few weeks ago." I laid the bank statement down next, and then the forensic report. The trust was funded with $287,000 in 2020. There's $4,110 left in it now. Nobody said anything for a moment. Somewhere in the house, the refrigerator hummed. Outside, a lawnmower started up 2 houses down. And I remember thinking how strange it was that the world kept doing ordinary things while this happened. "I don't understand," my mother said, though her voice suggested she understood a great deal. I looked at Shelby. "I think you do." I need to take a breath here, because what happened over the next hour was the hardest hour of this whole story, and I don't want to rush through it the way it didn't feel rushed when I was living it. Shelby's face went through several things in quick succession. Denial, then something closer to defense, then, when I laid the statement matching the $61,000 transfer to her and Dale's account down in front of her, something that finally cracked open into what looked almost like relief. "You don't understand what it's been like," she said, and her voice had gone thin. "Dale's business almost didn't make it the first 2 years. Hazel needed the school. She was struggling so bad at Ashford Elementary. They said she needed the smaller classes. Mom needed the roof fixed. I wasn't taking it for myself, Nora. I was taking care of this family the way you always." "The way I always what?" I said quietly. She stopped. "Say it," I said. "Not sharp. Just steady. The way I always did." Is that what you were going to say? She looked down at the table. My mother reached for the letter again, reading it a second time like it might say something different if she looked harder. Your grandmother should have told us, she said. This isn't fair. Setting something like this up behind everyone's back. She set it up because she watched Shelby borrow money her whole life without paying it back on time. I said, reading the line straight off the page because I didn't trust myself to paraphrase it gently. Her words, not mine. Dale hadn't said anything the entire time. He sat very still. And I watched him do the same thing I imagine I'd done in that guest room. Recalculate in real time exactly how much trouble he was in. I want to be clear about something, I said, and this was the part I'd rehearsed the most, alone in my car, in the shower, on the drive over. I'm not here to destroy anybody. I'm not here to call the police, not today. I'm here because I am legally responsible for what's left of that trust. And because Hazel and Miles still deserve what our grandmother meant for them to have. And because I will not sit at this table and pretend I don't know what I know. So what happens now, Shelby said. Her voice had gone very small. Now, I said, you're going to hear what Foster Whitlock told me my options are. And then you're going to tell me which one you'd rather it be. Foster Whitlock had given me 3 paths, laid out plain the way he laid out everything, no dressing them up and no talking me out of any of them. The first was criminal. Trust fraud, misappropriation of fiduciary funds. A case that would likely succeed given the paper trail, but one that would also mean police reports with my sister's name on them, possibly her arrest, definitely her children watching it happen. The second was civil. A lawsuit against Shelby and Dale for the recovery of trust assets, filed in probate court, slower but survivable for everyone involved, with the possibility of a structured repayment plan instead of a single ruinous judgment. The third was private. A repayment agreement, drafted and notarized, with real legal teeth, administered by me as trustee, no court involved unless they defaulted. I laid all 3 out on the kitchen table on Cedarbrook Lane exactly the way he'd laid them out for me. I'm not going to pretend the third option is generous, I said. It isn't generosity. It's what our grandmother would have wanted, and it's the only version of this where Hazel and Miles don't grow up knowing their mother went to court over money that was supposed to be there. If a payment is late without a real reason, we go to the second option, and I will not hesitate the second time. And if I can't pay all of it back, she said, then you'll pay what you can and you'll be honest with me about the rest. And we'll figure it out like people who are actually trying instead of people who are hiding folders on kitchen tables. That landed harder than I expected it to. Her head came up. You knew, she said. Back then. You saw the folder. I saw it, I said. I let it go because you're my sister and I wanted to believe good faith was still the default setting between us. The room was quiet a long moment. My mother had stopped defending anyone by then, sitting with her hands folded in her lap, looking older than she had an hour earlier. There was a piece of this I hadn't planned to say, and it came out anyway, because some things need saying out loud in the room where they happened instead of staying folded up in a coat pocket for the rest of your life. That winter you started calling me again, I said to Shelby. The tinsel. The coffee in the parking garage. It didn't erase the winter. It didn't undo the warmth of it either. Both things were true at once. The way both things are almost always true about people you've loved your whole life. I believe you, I said finally. Both parts. I think you did miss me, and I think you also needed me softened up. I don't know how to hold those apart from each other yet. I don't think I have to today. Foster Whitlock drew up the agreement within the week. Shelby and Dale signed it in his office, notarized, with a payment schedule that would take just over 6 years to complete. 6 years, the same number I'd spent gone from this family entirely. I noticed that. I don't think anyone else did. The sun had gone down by the time we left Cedarbrook Lane that Sunday. I sat in my car in the driveway for a minute before starting the engine. My grandmother's ruler on the passenger seat beside me. And I thought about how strange it was that the truth, once it was finally out in the open, felt less like a bomb and more like a long exhale. The agreement held. That's not nothing. And I don't want to rush past it. A year in, Shelby's payments came on time, every month, with a note attached each time. Not an apology exactly, but something adjacent to one. Payment 11 of 74. Miles asked about you today. I didn't rebuild the closeness we'd had that one winter. I'm honest enough to tell you that. Trust, once it's been used as a lever, doesn't spring back to its original shape just because the debt gets paid down. What we built instead was smaller and steadier. Dinners twice a year instead of twice a month. Birthday cards that meant what they said instead of performing what they were supposed to mean. A version of sisterhood built on documented honesty instead of assumed goodwill. My mother took longer to come around to what had happened. For a while she treated me like the one who'd broken something, instead of the one who'd found it already broken. That eased slowly, the way most things with my mother eased. Not with a conversation, but with time and small gestures that never got explained out loud. I used part of the recovered funds exactly the way our grandmother had intended. An education account for Hazel and Miles that I still administer. One that Shelby has never once asked me to touch early. Not even the year Dale's business had a rough quarter. I think that mattered to her, having a boundary that held. I think, in a strange way, it mattered to me too, having a boundary of my own that finally held. With what was left over after the kids' accounts were funded, I did something I hadn't planned but that felt, the moment I thought of it, like the only right answer. I started a small fund through the Ashford County Library in my grandmother's name, the Eleanor Callaway Fund, offering free basic financial literacy classes to anyone in the county who wanted them. How to read a bank statement. How to spot a number that doesn't match the story somebody's telling about it. I teach the first Saturday of every month myself. The first class filled within a week. Most of the people who show up are exactly who you'd think. Retirees on fixed incomes, young parents trying to get ahead of debt, people my grandmother would have recognized instantly, because she spent her whole life being underestimated by people who assumed a folding ruler was just a folding ruler. I still keep that ruler in my desk drawer at the firm, right next to the one at home on my kitchen table. I don't need it for measuring anything anymore. I keep it because every time I open that drawer I hear her voice. Measure twice, sweetheart. Especially now. She was right about nearly everything. She was right that somebody would try to get around what she'd built before I ever found it. She was right that I was the one who'd show up and read the fine print. And she was right about the thing that still settles something in my chest every time I think of it. That love, real love, is never about who's loudest in the room. It's about who's still standing there, quietly, when everyone else has stopped counting. I'm not betting on the loud one. I'm betting on the one who showed up.